Welcome to Turkmenistan. I'm a freelance journalist and I came here on assignment from the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. This human rights organization has been following the developments in civic and political rights in Turkmenistan and wanted to assess the changes in Turkmenistan over the 2 years that President Berdymukhammedov has been in power. This review by civil society is imperative as Western governments consider formalizing and escalating their economic relations with Turkmenistan. President Gurbanguly Berdymukhammedov promised sweeping reforms when he came to power, but little has changed since the last dictator, Turkmenbashi, died 2 years ago. The entire political process is still monopolized by one man. Minorities still face discrimination, and hundreds are still imprisoned for political reasons. Censorship is total, and any independent monitoring of Turkmenistan or its prisons is banned for organizations like the Red Cross. This vast country contains huge reserves of natural gas, which the government wants the world to know about. What it hides from the international community is that its prisons are filled with opponents of the regime. Hundreds of people, perhaps more, languish in Turkmen prisons on what are said to be politically motivated charges, cobbled together at unfair trials. And the government has shown no intention of conducting a nationwide review of such cases. It released 7 prisoners in 2007, but in 2008, 2 new activists have been held, one in a mental institution, and the other received an 11-year prison sentence. Under the current leadership, the most draconian restrictions have stayed in place. Citizens have to ask permission just to leave the country. At least 3 dozen people faced exit bans in 2008. This is an example of a typical letter banning travel, dated in 2007. It's from the Prosecutor's Office of Turkmenistan. It states that a request to visit Russia has been denied by the Turkmen authorities. Names have been blacked out to protect the source of this letter. Restrictions on movement exist within the country too. Checkpoints like this one exist on all major highways, checking locals and visitors to make sure they have permission to travel between regions.
I would say it's probably one of the worst places to live in the world. Absolutely no freedom of the press, absolutely no way you could voice any kind of opinion. It is still virtually a police state.
Finding somebody who's critical of the government to talk to is really difficult in Turkmenistan because people are afraid of what will happen to them if anybody sees their interview on television. So we're having to meet people at night, and I'm on my way to somebody's house to do a secret interview. Those that do speak insist on remaining anonymous for fear of retribution.
Unfortunately, there is this illusion that everything is just fine here, and as a result, international organisations and representatives of other countries only see what they want to, the superficial changes that are taking place, but they don't see that very little is changing in reality. We are hostages to the gas, it's sacred. Economic interests are deemed more important than people's basic rights.
The new president's supporters point to improvements in the education system since he came to power as a sign that reforms are in the works. But I visited a local school. Filming secretly, I saw that pupils were still being forced to study the Ruhnama, the last president's eccentric tract, which has been elevated to the status of a holy book. But go into an official bookshop and you'll see evidence of the new president's emerging cult of personality. There's already books featuring the new president on sale. In fact, many of the reforms implemented by the current president seem to be engineered to strengthen his grip on power, not to lift restrictions on freedom put in place by Turkmenbashi. A recent decree created a new state commission for literary works, whose approval authors will have to seek to be published. And the government media machine churns out a steady stream of stories focusing on the president. In 2007, Berdymukhammedov pushed through a new constitution that doesn't limit the number of terms he can stay in office. It gave him new powers, like the ability to issue edicts with the force of law and to hand-pick judges, as well as elections officials.
We're at a very critical moment in Turkmenistan's history because of this new revelation of massive reserves of natural gas. So it's up to the West, if we go in there, to exploit these gas fields, to insist on transparency, on good governance and accountability. Our fear is that these things are going to be left behind in the mad rush for gas and oil.
An activist told me that Western governments were no longer interested in speaking to human rights workers.
We used to get invited to the American embassy and European embassies, but now they pretend like we don't exist. They know that they won't get gas contracts if they associate with us.
On paper, the European Union says it wants Turkmenistan to stop behaving like a dictatorship if it's to benefit from closer ties. It's called for the country to allow rights activists to operate there. It must release all its political prisoners and lift restrictions on movement that make the country a prison in itself. But the West's eagerness to gain access to Turkmenistan's gas means human rights are no longer a burning issue.